Silence is not weakness. Silence is not ignorance. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the most dangerous weapon in the hands of the strong. The crowd fears silence because it leaves them alone with their thoughts, with their fears, with the unbearable weight of their own existence. They need chatter, noise, distractions, applause, because silence unmasks their emptiness. But the one who masters silence does not flee from himself. He confronts himself, he listens to the storm inside, and from this confrontation, he gains a power that no noise can provide. The art of silence is not merely the absence of words, it is the presence of strength. To remain silent when provoked is to demonstrate that the other does not control you. To remain silent in a world addicted to noise is to show that you are not a slave to its distractions. To remain silent while observing is to gather truths that others are too restless to notice. Noise is reactive, silence is sovereign. Think of the greatest thinkers, warriors, and creators. None of them were men of idle chatter. They withdrew, they became silent, and from that silence they forged ideas, strategies, and revolutions. Silence is the crucible of transformation, the realm where man becomes more than an echo of others. In silence he learns to think his own thoughts, to sharpen his will, to become untouchable by the madness of the crowd. The art of silence is also the art of strategy. He who speaks too much reveals his weaknesses. He who cannot hold his tongue becomes predictable, vulnerable, exposed. But the one who knows when to speak and when to remain silent holds the balance of power. His silence unnerves others, forces them to reveal themselves, and places him always one step ahead. Do not mistake silence for passivity. True silence is charged with intention. It is a silence that listens, that calculates, that prepares. It is the silence of the predator watching his prey. It is the silence of the mountain before the eruption. It is the silence of the mind before the birth of a great idea. To master silence is to master yourself, and to master yourself is to master the world. For the one who does not need constant validation, who does not crave constant recognition, who is not enslaved by the compulsion to be heard, such a one cannot be controlled. He is a force unto himself. Therefore, cultivate silence as you would cultivate strength. Withdraw from the crowd, withdraw from the noise, withdraw from the endless chatter that seeks to drown your mind, and in this silence discover your will, your clarity, your power. The one who can sit in silence without fear is already greater than the one who shouts to prove his existence. Silence is not weakness, but hidden strength, for silence is not the absence of power, but its most refined expression. The world has taught us that the loudest voice must be the strongest, that the one who dominates the conversation, who shouts the most and insists the hardest, is the one who holds authority. Yet history, philosophy, and life itself reveal the opposite. Those who cannot remain silent are not powerful, but powerless, unable to control themselves, unable to bear the weight of their own thoughts. To remain silent when others demand your reaction is to demonstrate mastery over your impulses, to show that you are not a puppet pulled by their strings. Weakness is the need to always explain yourself, to always justify, to always respond. Strength is to withhold, to wait, to allow the silence itself to speak in your stead. There is a certain terror in silence because silence forces confrontation. When a man says nothing, when he does not rush to answer, when he does not rush to fill the space, he creates an unbearable tension for those around him. They begin to reveal themselves. They speak too much, they over-explain, they stumble, they betray their fears and insecurities. Silence, therefore, becomes a mirror, one in which others see themselves more clearly than they ever intended. To wield silence in this way is not passivity, it is domination without words. For the silent one controls the rhythm of the interaction, and the one who controls rhythm controls power. Silence also protects. Words once spoken cannot be taken back. They can be twisted, misunderstood, used against you, but silence shields you. It makes you impenetrable, ungraspable. No one can misuse what you did not give them. And in this shielded state, you remain free. The man of noise constantly gives pieces of himself away, scattering his energy, revealing his intentions, surrendering his position. This silent man, by contrast, preserves his force, letting it accumulate until the right moment, when a single word, a single action, carries more weight than 1,000 frantic voices. Consider also that silence is not emptiness but concentration. It is the gathering of strength, the sharpening of thought, the preparation of will. Just as the archer pulls the string back into stillness before releasing the arrow, silence is the drawing back of the soul before it strikes with clarity. This is why silence is feared by the weak. They mistake it for nothingness, while in truth it is fullness, coiled potential, restrained power. The art of silence reveals that strength is not in constant motion, but in control of motion. To be silent when provoked, to stand calm in a storm of noise, is to show a superiority that words can never match. The world may misunderstand this as weakness, but the silent one knows. What they see as absence is presence. What they call weakness is strength. Silence is power disguised, and only the strong can bear its weight. Silence is the crucible of self-knowledge. When the world falls quiet, when distractions cease, and when the endless chatter of others no longer fills your ears, what remains is yourself, and for many, this is unbearable. People seek constant noise, not because they love it, but because it drowns out the voice within that asks questions they would rather avoid. In silence, the masks fall away, the roles collapse, and you are left alone with the raw truth of who you are. This confrontation is painful, for it reveals the contradictions, the fears, the repressed desires, and the unresolved wounds that lie hidden beneath the surface of daily life. Yet it is precisely through silence that these truths can be seen and eventually mastered. The man who never sits in silence is a stranger to himself. He may know how to please the crowd, how to adapt to the expectations of others, how to echo the beliefs of society, but he does not know the contours of his own soul. He lives outwardly, a hollow vessel filled with borrowed opinions and artificial passions. Silence strips him of these borrowed garments. It asks, what do you truly believe when no one is watching? What do you truly want when the applause is gone? What kind of man are you when all external lights fade? Only silence dares to pose such questions, and only the courageous dare to answer them. But silence is not only the stage upon which self-confrontation takes place. It is also the forge in which the fragmented self is unified. For in the noise of life the psyche scatters. It is pulled in 1,000 directions, seduced by every new sound, every passing distraction. Silence gathers these fragments, draws them back into the center, and reconstitutes them into wholeness. Through silence, one begins to feel again the rhythm of the inner life, to listen to the whispers of intuition, to perceive the subtle movements of thought that cannot be heard in the roar of constant noise. Philosophers and mystics have long recognized this. The greatest insights are born not in endless debate, not in the frantic exchange of words, but in the stillness of solitude. When the mind grows quiet, truths that were hidden in the shadows rise into awareness like stars appearing in the night sky. Silence, then, is not the absence of meaning, but the gateway to deeper meaning. To flee from silence is to flee from oneself. To embrace silence is to step into the terrifying but liberating space where the self can be seen clearly. And in seeing oneself clearly, one gains the foundation of true strength. The man who knows himself through silence cannot be manipulated by noise, for he has already faced the greatest noise of all, the restless chaos within. Silence is power because it disrupts the patterns of those who expect reaction. Most people reveal themselves not through action, but through their inability to remain still, their compulsion to speak, to explain, to justify. Words become confessions, and noise becomes a veil that only makes their weakness more visible. But the man who chooses silence denies others that easy access. He creates mystery, and mystery is authority. When you do not rush to explain yourself, when you do not scramble to fill the space with chatter, others are forced to confront their own discomfort. They project onto you their fears, their insecurities, their desires, and without you lifting a finger, you gain the upper hand, because in silence you allow them to reveal far more than you ever could. Power is not always the loud declaration of strength. It is often the calm refusal to be pulled into another's storm. Silence frustrates manipulators, disarms aggressors, and unsettles the arrogant. For those who thrive on provoking reactions, silence is unbearable because it denies them what they seek most, control over your inner state. By remaining quiet, you assert mastery not only over yourself, but over the situation. You become immovable, and in that stillness you radiate an authority that no words could ever manufacture. History remembers men who understood this principle. Leaders, philosophers, generals. They knew that silence is not weakness, but a weapon. When a commander pauses before speaking, his soldiers lean in. When a thinker withdraws into solitude, his words carry more weight when finally spoken. Silence intensifies presence. It magnifies every gesture, every word, so that when you do choose to break it, the world listens. Noise cheapens expression, silence elevates it. But this art is difficult because it demands mastery over one's impulses. The average man cannot bear silence because he is enslaved to the need for validation, to the fear of being misunderstood, to the compulsion of filling the void. He confuses silence with passivity, not realizing it is a form of discipline. To be silent when others demand a response is to declare, without speaking, that you are not their puppet. To withhold words is to remind the world that your voice is not a tool for others' convenience, but a force you alone control. The silent man is not invisible, he is unforgettable. He becomes the figure others speak about, wonder about, attempt to interpret. His silence commands more attention than the noise of 100 others. It is in that tension, in that unspoken presence, that true power lies. ChatGPT said, "Silence is not only a social weapon, it is the crucible of thought." In noise, the mind scatters, drawn outward into the chaos of the world, enslaved by distractions, opinions, and trivialities. But in silence, thought gathers strength, like a flame protected from the wind. It grows sharp, focused, dangerous. Great ideas are not born in the clamor of endless chatter. They emerge from the stillness that most people fear. Silence is the soil in which depth can take root, and without it, we remain shallow, repeating the same phrases, living the same lives, trapped in the same cycles. Modern man fears silence because it forces him to face himself. He fills every void with music, conversation, or noise, not realizing that in doing so he strangles his own capacity for original thought. He consumes words endlessly, but rarely creates. He speaks much, but understands little. Silence demands patience, and patience is the discipline of the strong. To sit with silence is to confront the unfiltered truth of your own being, to listen to the voice that the world drowns out, the voice of your instincts, your reason, your inner compass. Those who cannot be alone in silence will always be ruled by the voices of others. Nietzsche understood that silence is not emptiness, but fullness. It is not the absence of life, but the presence of depth. Silence is not passive, it is active, like the tension before a storm, the coiling of energy before release. The man who cultivates silence is preparing his thought as a warrior sharpens his blade. He does not waste words, he waits until they are sharpened by reflection, so that when he finally speaks, his words cut through illusions with the precision of steel. To master silence is to master time itself, because you refuse the urgency imposed by others. Instead of reacting, you allow space for perspective, for judgment, for clarity. In silence, you are not enslaved by impulse. You become the architect of deliberate action, and this is why silence and strength are inseparable, because only a strong man can endure the weight of his own thoughts. Only a strong man can resist the temptation to dissipate his energy in endless noise. Thus, silence is the foundation of true intellect. It allows the mind to deepen rather than scatter, to create rather than consume. It is the mark of the thinker, the philosopher, the strategist. In silence, the mind becomes a fortress, impenetrable to the noise of the crowd, invulnerable to the distractions of the weak. And it is from this fortress that one can step forth, not with empty words, but with ideas that alter the course of men. Silence is not only a condition of thought, but a force of power. To remain silent when provoked, when others expect a reaction, is to seize control of the moment. Most people cannot tolerate silence. They rush to fill it with explanations, apologies, or nervous chatter. In their eagerness to be heard, they reveal too much, their weaknesses, their fears, their intentions. But the man who remains silent forces others into discomfort. His restraint unsettles them because silence cannot be interpreted easily. It becomes a mirror into which they project their own anxieties. Thus, silence commands more authority than noise ever could. When you remain silent, you do not give away your position. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability is power. In politics, in relationships, in war, the most dangerous man is the one who says nothing. Words can be challenged, twisted, or dismissed, but silence is untouchable. It lingers like a presence that cannot be defeated. Silence compels others to move around you, to interpret you, to respond to you. By withholding, you force others to expend their energy while you preserve your own. There is also an element of intimidation in silence. A man who cannot be read inspires unease, and unease leads to respect. Those who talk endlessly are dismissed as weak, but the one who speaks little is watched closely. His words, when they finally arrive, carry disproportionate weight because they emerge from scarcity. Silence magnifies value, turning ordinary speech into a weapon. If you wish your words to strike deeply, let silence precede them, for silence creates the hunger that makes them unforgettable. But beyond its practical utility, silence is a declaration of independence. It is the refusal to be dragged into the endless theater of human triviality. The noisy man is enslaved by his need for validation, while the silent man is free. He does not waste himself in constant explanation or defense. He allows his presence to speak, and his actions to define him. Silence says, "I do not need to prove myself to you." That is why it unnerves, because it is a stance of sovereignty. Nietzsche would argue that power lies not in those who shout the loudest, but in those who speak the least and yet command the most. Silence becomes a weapon because it is rare, and rarity is always valuable. In a world addicted to noise, silence is resistance, and in resistance there is strength. ChatGPT said, "Silence is not mere absence of sound. It is a crucible in which the self is forged." When the noise of the world falls away, when you are no longer intoxicated by chatter, distraction, and the endless echoes of other people's desires, you are left face to face with yourself. For most, this is unbearable. They fear the silence because it strips away illusions and confronts them with the truth of who they are. That is why so many fill every moment with noise, music, conversation, arguments, gossip, anything to avoid the mirror of silence. But only in silence does the soul begin to speak. Silence is the discipline of listening inwardly. In it, you begin to hear the stirrings of instincts long buried under culture, conformity, and expectation. You encounter the dark corners of your being, the desires you denied, the fears you suppressed, the resentments you never admitted. This confrontation is painful, but it is also liberating, because only by recognizing what lies hidden can you claim mastery over it. To embrace silence is to dare to know yourself in your entirety, not just the polished mask you present to the world. Nietzsche understood that silence is a path to strength because it destroys illusions. In noise, you can deceive yourself with borrowed opinions, repeating the phrases of others until they sound like your own thoughts. But silence strips away those crutches. In the absence of outside voices, you are forced to discover what you truly believe, what you truly want, and what you are willing to suffer for. That discovery makes you dangerous, because a man who knows himself cannot be manipulated by the opinions of the herd. Furthermore, silence teaches patience. In a world that demands immediacy, silence allows for depth. To sit with your thoughts without distraction is to cultivate endurance of spirit. You learn to wait without restlessness, to hold back until the moment is right, to endure solitude without collapsing into despair. This patience becomes strength, because it frees you from the tyranny of urgency. You act when you choose, not when the world demands. In silence, the self is not destroyed, but reborn. It is stripped of decoration, tested by solitude, and forced to stand on its own. Out of that process emerges a deeper authenticity, a presence that does not need validation, a confidence rooted in inner clarity rather than external applause. Silence is not weakness. It is the highest form of self-possession. ChatGPT said, "Silence is the language of power. Those who speak endlessly reveal themselves, they scatter their force in fragments, and in their eagerness to be understood, they become predictable, transparent, and therefore weak. But the one who knows how to withhold words, who can embrace silence without anxiety, possesses a kind of gravity that unsettles others. People begin to wonder what such a person thinks, what they plan, what truths they conceal. Silence draws others in. It compels respect because it cannot be easily deciphered. To remain silent when others expect you to speak is to wield a weapon sharper than any retort. This is why silence must not be confused with passivity. It is not the silence of submission, but the silence of mastery. The silence of the wolf, not the sheep. It is the silence that knows it could speak but chooses not to, because restraint preserves strength. Words, once released, lose their potency, but silence builds tension, creates mystery, and commands attention. The silent man appears as though he knows something others do not, and perhaps he does, for silence itself grants a vantage point denied to the noisy. Consider how power often shifts not through loud declarations, but through quiet calculation. A king who thunders at every provocation exposes his insecurity. A strategist who reveals his plans in advance has already lost. True power thrives in opacity. The man who governs his tongue governs the impressions of others. He becomes the blank canvas upon which they project their fears, hopes, and uncertainties. In this way, silence multiplies its force by exploiting the imagination of those who cannot bear the void. But silence is not only a mask to intimidate others. It is also the space where clarity is born. A mind unburdened by compulsive chatter sharpens like a blade. In stillness, you perceive movements that noise would obscure. You anticipate shifts, notice weaknesses, and see openings invisible to those too eager to speak. Silence is a form of listening, not just to others, but to reality itself. In that receptivity lies foresight, and foresight is one of the purest forms of strength. Thus, silence is a paradox. It is both presence and absence, both restraint and influence. To cultivate it is to stand outside the frenzy of the herd and to command precisely because you are not swept up in its madness. Silence does not beg to be heard, but it ensures that when you finally choose to speak, your words fall like thunder after a long, tense stillness. That is the art of silence, to conserve energy, to deepen perception, and to wield speech as a weapon of precision rather than an indulgence of weakness.